Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Today's guest is Daniel Geey. He's a lawyer in the sports and football industry for over a decade. In his career, he has been involved in high-profile Premier League club takeovers, multi-million-pound transfers, and player contract negotiations. Daniel is also the author of the book Done Deal, and he hosts his own podcast with the same name. In this episode, you will learn about Messi and Ronaldo's recent transfers, what part the agent plays, what peculiar clauses Daniel has seen in contracts over the years, and much more. Daniel Geey, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to talk and hopefully have an enjoyable chat about football.
I'm sure we will. So you are a sports lawyer, or a football lawyer actually, mostly I guess, at Sheridans Sport. So just briefly, what does that include?
Yeah, so I'm a sports lawyer. Yeah, I do a lot of work in football, and usually that involves me working talent side for the business. So I work with a lot of players and agencies in relation to anything from transfers and contract renegotiations to commercial deals, boot deals, image rights related matters, all of the types of advice on the regulations of football that obviously could be quite far reaching, from Premier League, Football Association, UEFA, FIFA, particular other national jurisdictions. I also deal with quite a lot of disputes in relation to maybe the club has a disciplinary issue against a player, or maybe an agent is suing another agent, or maybe a player has an issue with a newspaper, for example. And then I also tend to work with a number of high net worth individuals and people generally that have stakes in different sports franchises or clubs, including football clubs, and help them either buying or selling clubs or making the right types of investment, and then all of the legal and regulation advice that comes with it.
That's very interesting. And you have written about most of these topics in your book, Done Deal. I got it right here, actually.
Super.
I really think the book is great. And I want to tell the listeners that you do not need to have a law degree to understand the book. You are explaining all the topics very well. And I think that if you have an interest for football, you should definitely buy this book. So I was thinking that we can use your book as kind of a backbone for this interview today, if that's okay.
Fantastic. No, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And in a way, that was the reason for writing the book. It was not to try and be a lawyer's guide. It was to be someone that's worked in the industry for quite a while and try and actually make a lot of issues clearer, so that, people who don't work in the industry day to day but still have a really big interest and passion for the industry can really dig into the detail and dispel some myths about particular things as well.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. One of the most talked about topics is transfers. So when talking about transfers, you hear these humongous sums of money. If we just break it down, can you explain the transfer fee, contract negotiation, and the other elements involved?
Of course. And there's lots of different elements to this, as I sort of set out in the book, as you said. I think the important thing to note, at least on transfer fees, for example, is is to do with the fee that the buying club will pay a selling club for allowing the registration to terminate and for a new employment contract to be entered into. But I think, as you said, these are really large sums, 50 million, 100 million, 150 million that was reported for Kane, even though that didn't happen. The 200 million euros that was reported to be bid for Mbappe from Madrid over the last few weeks as well. The truth is that these very big sums as transfer fees usually do not get paid upfront in one sum. Almost always it's spread like an installment basis, in truth, over the length of the contract. It tends to be. But again, depending on the negotiation positions of the parties and who has more leverage, who has more strength, then sometimes, a selling club might demand more upfront, so maybe 50% of the amount or 60% of the amount, with the other amounts according to particular performance-related elements too. And that's just one part of the bigger transfer pie, because then obviously the buying club has to negotiate, usually via a player's agent, the player's employment contract, how much they're going to get paid, what bonuses are going to be incorporated. And there usually can be significant types of bonuses. Release clauses about what happens if a player does well and a new club wants to transfer that player out. Is there a set amount which then the club will automatically allow the player to move on? There might be sell-on fees from the buying club back to the original selling club. And then also, just by way of usually the third large document is the agreement between the buying club and the player's agent as to what the commission rates should be. Because, one of the elements that still is a little bit confused by some people is that, everybody thinks that an agent actually is paid by their clients, the player. So the player pays his or her agent. But in almost all cases of transfers that I'm involved with, the buying club pays the agent on the player's behalf, usually on the player's behalf, and sometimes for other services too. So that sort of adds to the complexity of how a transfer can come around, can be finalized and hopefully put across the line.
For sure. So if a contract expires, then they become a free agent. Then the transfer fee disappears, right?
Correct. And then, in the past, especially, what the buying club would consider is that they can make a more attractive proposition, financial proposition and package to the player, because if they don't have to pay a transfer fee, which will sometimes run into the tens of millions of pounds, they can offer that money or part of that money by way of incentive for the player to sign for them on a free transfer. That might be very large signing on fees. It might be in terms of bonuses like loyalty bonuses spread out over a contract. And it may also be very large weekly sums or other types of bonuses allocated. Usually, it can be a combination of all of those things. But as years have gone on, one of the issues that some clubs have seen, so for example, Juventus in Italy had quite a strong proposition for trying to sign up free transfer players. The downside of signing up free transfer players sometimes is their weekly wages are extremely large, so that if then that club wants to move on such players, not using Juventus, but other clubs as well as necessary, a lot of players won't be willing to reduce their wages by a significant amount if they still have a long-term contract left with the club. So yes, you're right in that if you go on a free transfer, there's no transfer fee to be paid. And that can obviously be very attractive to the agent and the player in terms of large salaries. But clubs also have to be wary that if they pay their players very big sums and don't see a long-term future possibly for those players, it can sometimes be difficult to transfer those individuals out at a later time.
Yeah, and you mentioned bonuses as well. I guess there are performance-based bonuses that if there is a striker, that if they make X amount of goals, but what other type of bonuses could there be in contracts?
Yeah, it's a great point, because historically, the types of bonuses that you would see relate to goal bonuses, assist bonuses, win bonuses, appearance bonuses. And usually you can group them in two categories. One is an individual bonus, i.e. a bonus that the player earns regardless of the rest of the team, perhaps. And then there are collective team bonuses that everybody wins as long as they contribute. And what has been happening, I would say, as a trend probably in the last 5 or 6 years, especially as a great book by Serrano, who is Ferran Serrano, who is the Manchester City. I think he's chief executive of the City Group, I think, in total. When he was at Barcelona, he advocated a 2/3, 1/3 split, which was 2/3 guaranteed salary and 1/3 performance-based. But usually that 1/3 performance-based was collective performances. So if the team won and the player appeared in the game, then they would receive significant performance bonuses. But if the team didn't win, regardless of how many goals that player scored or the amount of assists that the player had made or the clean sheets that the player, defender or goalkeeper had, because they were more individual bonuses, sometimes they individual and collective bonuses align, but sometimes they don't as well. So we're seeing more of an alignment towards collective bonuses, team bonuses, rather than those individual, how many goals have you scored and you'll get extra amounts of money.
Of course, with the bonus and the salaries, we are talking about a lot of money. One aspect to consider, though, is tax, which might differ between countries or even between states. So how big part does tax play in the transfer and contract process?
Yeah, it can do. There are certain countries, for example, where the agents and the players will ask for an amount net of taxes, so they understand the actual amount after tax has been effectively removed or deducted from their salary, so that then there is effectively a risk on the club that if tax rates go up, for example, it is the club that actually then will have to pay more provisionally to the player in order to get the net amount, the agreed amount. There's also another question, which is, some agents and players are less likely to go to certain countries if, for example, particular clubs have less of a good reputation on paying players on a regular basis, for example. So, the truth is there was a recent tax act, I think, implemented in Italy, which gave potential better status for some players moving there. But, a lot of the other countries, sometimes agents will ask for what the net amount should be so that, in a way, the clubs are taking the risk rather than the player accordingly.
I see. So talking about contracts, what are the funniest or most odd clauses that you have seen in a football contract?
Yeah, well, I think you've read the couple of pages around the strange clauses in football employment contracts that I've read about and I've seen and I've heard in different ways. Well, there was a couple of interesting ones. One was there was a former Liverpool player called Stig Inge Bjorneby, and some of his family were very good downhill skiers. So there was a clause in his contract at Liverpool saying that he wasn't able to ski, obviously because it was a hazardous activity. There are other clauses, like, for example, when Stefan Schwarz, the Swedish midfielder, moved to Sunderland, is that Sunderland had previously read that Schwarz was keen on travelling to space one day. So he wrote a clause into his contract to say during his time at Sunderland, he wasn't able to go into space, which was obviously quite a strange clause. And there are other clauses. It was reported that there was, again, I'm sorry, I'm using Liverpool examples, but another Liverpool player, a player called Neil Ruddock, when he actually moved to a club called Crystal Palace, at different times of his career, he had, it's fair to say, different weight issues. And so there was apparently a clause which said that if he weighed over a certain amount for any particular game, his salary might be reduced. So he had a weight clause actually in his contract. Neymar, for example, it was reported, had a friends party clause, which was his friends could, Barcelona, I think at the time, would pay flights for his friends to come out to be able to see him, I think, once a month or once every other month. So there's a vast array of different reported clauses that have been reported to be put in place over the years.
That's very funny. If that doesn't make you a good friend, I don't know what will. This episode is sponsored by Insport Education, the online business school for sport. They offer a range of different courses, for example, Foundations of Sport Business, Private Equity in Sport, and much, much more. As a listener to this podcast, you get 10% off all of their courses using the code SportsManagementPodcast10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today. On the topic of transfers and contracts, obviously we have had two huge ones lately in Messi and Ronaldo. And one thing that is always mentioned during a transfer is shirt sales, that the club will make their money back in shirt sales. Can you just talk a little bit about that and explain just why that is not always accurate?
Exactly. So the narrative in the past has been when, for example, David Beckham moved to Madrid or Galaxy, for example, that the amount the club would make in shirt sales would easily recoup the transfer fee or the wages that were paid to the player. Now, in a way, it's a bit of an artificial narrative because, nowadays, Ronaldo, Messi, Mbappe, Neymar, a lot of the world stars, in a way, have huge off-field commercial value in truth. It might be that clubs can attract bigger shirt sponsors, training ground sponsors, other types of partners who want to be able to use particular imagery of, these superstars. But if we're being as narrow as shirt sales, the way that most shirt deals are done between apparel manufacturers like Nike or Adidas or Puma and the very big clubs like Madrid and Barcelona and Chelsea and Manchester United, etc., usually relate to very big upfront retainer payments. So it's reported that Adidas pay Manchester United £75 million per season with certain performance bonuses for being able to effectively market the kit and sell the Manchester United kit accordingly. Now, what usually happens on those type of deals is on the whole, Adidas make the vast majority of those sales and the profits from those sales. And usually it is only after a set amount of shirt sales is actually sold, does then a revenue share or a split occur between someone like Adidas or Nike and someone like, Manchester United or Chelsea, or whoever else it might be, or Barcelona. And even in that instance, it's reported that usually those net profit distributions are only sometimes worth between 10 and 20% to the club. So that means if you do your sums very basically, it would take tens of millions of shirt sales likely in order to be able to recoup anyone's salary or large transfer fees accordingly. And the truth is that, I think everyone expects that somehow tens and 20 millions of shirts are sold by a particular club each year. Now, there might be exceptions to the rule, but the shirt sales tend to be in the region for the very, very top clubs of between 1.5 to 3 million shirt sales in total per season. And even 3 million is very much on the higher end. So I think the point just to stress there is, on the whole, even if the threshold is met whereby some shirt sale revenue is split between the apparel manufacturer and the club, it would take a huge amount of shirt sales in order to recoup a significant amount. But again, we're talking about one revenue generation element for the club. The much wider revenue generation element of partnership agreements, of other types of sponsorship deals, and other new partners that might come in or renew deals because of particular players come in, can be lucrative.
For sure. And in the case of Ronaldo, it's been reported now that his shirt sales have broken all kinds of records. So I know it's not the norm, but do you think that in this case it could be true that they could make their money back on shirt sales?
Who knows? The truth is that the agreement between Adidas and Manchester United is confidential. So we don't know at what point the revenue share begins, and we don't know what the commercial margins might be. It's likely that the Man United shop might have a slightly larger retail margin than on the Adidas website, for example. And, there's always question marks around whether fans were still going to buy a Manchester United shirt, regardless of whether it was going to be Ronaldo or not. So the actual question is sometimes the marginal incremental amount that for fans that were not going to buy a shirt had it not been for Ronaldo then coming to the club and then wanting the shirts accordingly. So it would be a huge success for Manchester United if they overall got to around 3 or 4 million shirts sold for this season for Ronaldo. But in a way, let's just for argument's sake say for every shirt sold, Manchester United were going to earn £10 for that from zero onwards, which wouldn't be the case as well. You can do the maths. It's not astronomical to the extent that, the reported salary of Ronaldo is between £400,000 and £500,000 per week, for example. And that's not obviously including his transfer fee of around, I think, 20 million euros or so.
That's a good point. In the case of Messi, he also took part of his salary in cryptocurrency. Is that something that becomes more common these days?
Well, I think everyone can see crypto, NFTs, and Bitcoin-related matters generally are becoming more mainstream because, these type of companies are attaching themselves to sports and entertainment brands more generally, presumably to be able to market to big audiences, but to enable some type of acceptance in the mainstream, basically. We've seen over in the last week or so that, for example, the NFL, I believe, have actually banned all crypto and digital coin related partnerships, at least for the time being. I know that hasn't been the case with many of the other leagues, for example. Ultimately, it's a type of speculation in truth. And as you've seen, for example, with Bitcoin over the last 2 or 3 years, that initial dip, whenever it was, maybe pre-pandemic, to where Bitcoin is now, for example, I'm sure a lot of people would have felt that they should have held on to their Bitcoin rather than sold in the downturn. So it's like anything. I wouldn't quite call it stocks and shares, but unless you understand the underlying asset or the underlying rationale or business case for how crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin and NFTs work, it feels like to some more of a speculation tool than trying to understand the underlying asset and how it will fit into the wider, finance business ecosystem in the next 5 to 10 years.
We mentioned taxes before, so could that be a reason for why players want part of their salaries in cryptocurrency, or what would be the incentive, do you think?
I can't really comment on the tax side, not really as a tax lawyer, unfortunately, but sometimes it can be part of a partnership and publicity elements to things. It might be that a particular partner issuing these particular types of currencies, and therefore it is of potentially less opportunity cost for them rather than paying in pounds or euros or dollars, for example. But yeah, the truth is I'm not sure of all of the rationale on that, I'm afraid.
I understand. We have talked about the players and the contracts. If we move on to the teams and the clubs, of course, they are the one paying this huge sums of money to the players. So first of all, where do most of the teams' revenues come from?
Yep. Depending on the league, the top 5 or 6 leagues, especially in Europe, the vast majority of the monies come from centralized broadcasting rights. And that's the very large broadcasters that are willing to pay significant amounts to be able to then broadcast matches involving the elite top leagues in a particular jurisdiction. So, for example, in the Premier League, which is the league that I probably specialize in the most and have the most experience, the broadcasters Sky and BT and Amazon Prime now have paid for 2 cycles running now over £5 billion over a 3-year basis to be able to buy just the UK domestic rights. In truth, that's how important those rights are. And there are a number of foreign broadcasters that have bid extremely large amounts of money to be able to then broadcast the Premier League, for example, in their territories, in their jurisdiction. And what that means in total is the collective revenue generation just from broadcasting rights for the Premier League over the last cycle has been over £8 billion for a 3-year period, mainly a 3-year period. And that's equated more or less to each year the top Premier League team, the team that wins the Premier League, earning over £160 million, and the bottom team who gets relegated earning around 100 million or just under 100 million pounds. So you add that amount of money into then if the club participates in European competition, UEFA competition like the Champions League or the Europa League or the Conference League this year, it can be extremely lucrative if you win well in your group stages on a per win basis and then get to the latter stages of the competition as well. I think it was reported the year before last that Liverpool were the first team to break the £250 million mark in broadcasting revenues alone because of their second place finish in the Premier League and winning the Champions League when they did a couple of years ago now. In addition to obviously the broadcasting monies, all of the stadium revenues from actually attending games and corporate events and merchandising revenues, along with then the agreements that they may have with shirt, apparel brands, with the front of shirt sponsors, with a number of other tiered sponsors as well, means that, the revenues can hit over €500 million basically for a number of the top clubs. And that's where the vast majority of the revenues come from in order to pay the biggest cost base, which is effectively the salaries of the players, which is usually where most of that revenue goes.
As we said, the clubs are spending a lot of money, mostly on the players. So a couple of years ago, FFP, financial fair play, was introduced to protect the clubs from themselves mostly, something that you also explain very well in your book. So can you explain for us here now a little bit more in detail, what is FFP?
Yeah, of course. So back in the mid-2000s to late 2000s, there was concern amongst a number of clubs across the continent that clubs were spending beyond their means. So it didn't matter how much clubs were bringing in by way of revenue. If you had a wealthy benefactor, that benefactor could spend whatever they wanted to increase the on-field ability of the players and then, win trophies and win leagues and win Champions Leagues, etc. And so UEFA, as a result of pretty wide endemic losses across European clubs, which sort of totaled over almost €2 billion in a particular season pre the rules coming in, effectively put in place a set of regulations which said that on the whole, with transition period, that clubs couldn't spend more than, in the end, it was 30 to 35 million euros over a 3-year cycle, basically. So that then the incentive on the clubs was to improve revenue generation, keep cost control at a sustainable level, and then try and lead to better business practices as a result towards breaking even effectively. Now, there were quite a lot of controversies around that time with clubs like PSG and Manchester City and other clubs potentially spending over the amounts that they were permitted to. There have been cases at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. There are cases ongoing still at the moment in relation to FFP related matters, to the extent now that, in the middle of the pandemic and towards obviously perhaps hopefully the end of the COVID pandemic, that UEFA is thinking about changing its FFP regulations to a degree to maybe focus more on salary caps and wage restrictions rather than club break-even and cost control. So watch this space in a way, because it looks like the regulatory structure or framework for cost control might be changing sooner rather than later.
One question that I ask everyone is if you have had any bumps on the road in your career, and if so, how did you overcome this?
If I told you all of them, it would take another 3 hours of the podcast, in truth. All the time, I think on the whole, it's quite healthy to be constantly thinking whether you're good enough for the job, whether you've got the right skills, whether you're continuing to improve your knowledge, to understanding when things don't go perfectly, to building your resilience, to understanding mistakes or failings, to making sure that you're constantly trying to think about ways to get better, in truth. I'm sure, as with most of your listeners and yourself included, I've been in lots of different corporate environments, when, you have appraisals or where you get a piece of work back and someone says, well, you should think about doing that differently, or maybe think about this, or your attention to detail might be better at different times. And those are all the things that I learned, especially as a junior lawyer becoming more senior in my profession, and how to deal with, different situations and those type of things. So I would actually say that if you don't think you have dealt with mistakes or failings or bumps in the road, then I'd probably call you a little bit of a liar or a little bit deluded in the job that you're doing, in truth, because we're all human and we're all there to try and do our best a lot of the time. So yeah, plenty of things that you can always improve on. I always think it's how you deal with the setback or the particular issue, which usually defines you more. Because there's a great line in The Lion King, the Disney film, The Lion King, which I always really like, which is by the monkey, Rafiki, I think, when he's speaking to Simba, and he says, you either run from it or you learn from it. And I quite like that idea.
That's a great one. So obviously we cannot cover all of your book or all the aspects of football law here in half an hour. But is there anything that you feel is important to mention that I haven't asked you so far?
No, I think it's really great. And look, if we want to do a part 2 at some point in a few weeks, I'm more than happy to speak again, because it's been really nice chatting, and it'd be good to do it again soon.
Definitely. And before we sign off here, if you could choose the next guest on my podcast, who would you recommend that I would speak to?
Oh, is that anybody, full stop?
I would say someone from the sports world, at least.
Yeah, I think, I would say, I'm not sure how many football agents you've had on, but there's a number of really good football agents that I work with. There's a number I would potentially recommend, but I would think, a football agent, because sometimes they get a bit of a raw deal in the media, and sometimes they think everyone thinks all football agents are just out for themselves and just looking for the next deal. But there's a number of extremely good agents that do a fantastic job for their clients and their players.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I thought you were going to mention Omar, to be honest, but because I listened into your Twitter live yesterday.
I talk about him too much. I can't give him too much of a big head that every time I do. But if you want me to make an introduction to Omar, the truth is that always find cleverer people to talk with, because then they make you look good. If I'm just saying very stupid things or very normal things, he's always the one that makes sense of a lot of the stuff. So Omar would be a great guy for the show too.
And just finally from you, where can the listeners buy your book? And also you have your own web shop. You're selling some merch also.
Yes, great. So you can buy Done Deal on Amazon or any usual bookstores, and on my website, which is danielgeey.com. And also I have a charity website called 13shop.co.uk. That's where I have just a fashion brand side hustle, basically, where for my mum's cancer oncologist doctor, we raised funds for his groundbreaking research into breast and ovarian cancer. And so I started a brand called 13, which is a lucky number for some and an unlucky number for others. And I just, I have t-shirts and hoodies and caps and socks and all those types of things that basically on the weekend I'm modeling on a daily basis so everybody can see my caps or other things at different times. So yes, if anyone wants to have a look or help publicize it to other people, that would be fantastic.
That's great. I will put the links in the show notes below as well.
Thanks, Mark.
Daniel Geey, thank you so much for being on the Sports Management Podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.